Good afternoon and welcome back to the Energy Intelligence Forum. I am joined here by Mark Finley, Fellow in Energy and Global Oil at Rice University's Baker Institute. Thank you for joining me this afternoon, Mark.
Thanks for the invitation, Alex.
Mark, to start off, I wanted to talk US shale. How do you see the US shale oil sector business model evolving with such a vast known resource in the Permian and the Bakken, shutting down the need to explore onshore?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a completely different business model now. Put simply, it's a manufacturing process rather than the old oil business that we all grew up with of exploration and production. It puts all the focus on speed, technical excellence, and financial strength. And the U.S. shale production, it's important to keep this in perspective. U.S. shale is still less than 10% of global oil production. Natural gas is bigger, but it's about 20%. So the vast majority of the world's oil and gas is still produced the old-fashioned way. And that means that outside of the U.S. onshore patch, less of a change, except to the degree that the shale revolution has implications for global prices of both oil and natural gas.
Thank you. And Mark, how well will this evolving US sector compete in a lower global price environment?
Well, I hate to say it depends, Alex, but I'm an economist, and so the answer is always, it depends. Even at today's prices, at today's low prices, the best prospects with the best operators can still compete on the global stage. Going forward, I think the key questions are the degree to which the industry can cut costs and improve productivity. On that front, I'm relatively optimistic in the very near term, but then I get cautious fast. In the very near term, the reason why I'm optimistic is because as the industry is contracted, we're seeing only the best crews working the best prospects, and so we're seeing an improvement in productivity. But looking further out, I think the scope for industry cutting costs is pretty constrained. I mean, let's face it, this is not 2015 and 16 when we were coming out of $100 oil. There was no fat in the system to begin with this time around. And on the technology front, last down cycle we saw in prices, we saw a doubling and tripling of per rig productivity in the major US shale oil plays. That's not going to happen again because as the technology matures, the scope for continued learning and innovation is just a lot less than it was before.
Thank you. That's really interesting, Mark. And to move on, I wanted to ask you, the US seems now fairly energy self-sufficient, but will cheaper global supply change that dynamic?
Could do. So far, the COVID pandemic has really hurt domestic oil demand so that the sharp drop in domestic production hasn't really pushed the U.S. back into a net importer status. Going forward, if demand continues its recent recovery and the shale patch struggles, the U.S. could become a net oil importer again, but it's really important to keep this in perspective. Self-sufficient doesn't mean independent. Even now, the United States is importing 6 million barrels a day of crude oil and another 2 million barrels a day of refined products. It's just that those are balanced by exports of about 3 and 5 million barrels a day, respectively, of crude oil and refined products. So we're still very integrated and connected into a global marketplace. And even if the United States moves from being self-sufficient into being a small net importer, nobody's talking about going back to importing 60% of our oil needs, which was the case 15 years ago.
Thank you. And Mark, just to finish, I wanted to ask you how you feel the spectre of falling global oil demand and decarbonisation might impact the industry worldwide.
I think it's a massive topic, and a number of your panels discussed what it means for the business models of the companies, the fuels that they produce, the energy they provide. I think if we think classically in terms of falling oil demand and what it means for the oil industry, I think it'll make the first order impact is that it makes the industry dramatically more competitive. For 150 years, we've worried about running out of supply. Now we're worried about running out of demand. But it's not just lower demand and what that means for prices that I think needs to be considered from an oil producer and oil company perspective. I think you're going to see a significant shift in emphasis as we move into a greater emphasis on ESG issues and decarbonization for less carbon intensive production processes. And that will, work to the advantage of the big low cost producers like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Aramco is already trumpeting the low carbon profile of its oil production. But I think the real big issue is, in a world of constrained demand, it could push countries that have large low-cost reserves, again, like Saudi Arabia, to shift to a policy of more aggressively competing for market share in order to monetize their resources. And in fact, the Saudi government has a very aggressive program to diversify its economy, the Vision 2030 program, which is specifically being undertaken to reduce its dependence on oil revenues, with an eye on this transition to a lower carbon future, potentially lower oil prices, and a need to compete more aggressively for market share on the global stage, for which I think they're well positioned.
Well, that's lots of food for thought, Mark. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your insights this afternoon. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Alex. And again, thank you for the opportunity to join you all. I enjoyed the event this week, and wish you all safe health and stay well.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you.